Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this session from London Funders, which is part of the GLA's Festival of Ideas. We're just going to give it a minute. Hopefully everyone is now zooming into the webinar. So I'll just give you a minute or two to settle. So just to say, we are recording this session so that we can share it with people who aren't able to join us live. You're probably familiar with the webinar format, but you'll see the chat function and the Q&A function. So we can't see you, although you can see us. We can't see you as attendees. So do feel free to use the chat to tell us who you are. And also the Q&A, which we'll come to later on in the session if there's questions that you want to ask the panel. So we'll get started, and we are due to be joined by another panelist who's just got caught up, so hopefully he'll join us shortly. But in the meantime, we're going to get started. And yeah, really pleased to be able to be doing this session, which the theme of the GLA's festival is all about how we can build stronger communities. And that's something which we feel is such a key part of what place-based giving is trying to do in London. So we're really pleased to use this session, I suppose, to really try and explore what that means and share some of our learning and ideas from people involved in the place-based giving from different perspectives in London to see also how we can build on that in the future. My name's Helen Matthey. I work at London Funders as one of the directors of collaboration, and we're all around how we can work better together as a sector of funders in London civil society, and we've been working to support London's giving, so place-based giving schemes across London for a number of years now, and really excited to be able to share some of what we've learned from London Funders as part of this session. Before I kick off and introduce our panelists properly, just in terms of a small bit of housekeeping. So I mentioned this is a webinar format, so please do make use of the chat and Q&A functions. We're recording the session. There are live captions which you can sort of set up from your own screen, and we won't put it on the main one, but if you do want those, you can do that from your own settings. And the format of the session is we're going to sort of kickstart with a bit of an overview about what we mean by place-based giving. We're going to move in to hear from our panelists and what their perspective is and why they're involved in place-based giving, and then move to a kind of informal Q&A session between us. So yeah, we will warmly encourage you and invite you to share your ideas and questions for that. So I'm very pleased to introduce our speakers. So we've got Rachel Engel, who's the Regional Director of Macquarie Group Foundation, Savraj Kaur, who's the Exec Director of United in Hammersmith and Fulham, who is the place-based giving scheme for that borough, and Kristina Glenn, who has a wealth of experience and knowledge on place-based giving and is one of our advisors for the London's Giving team, and has herself been involved particularly with Islington as one of the sort of founding people involved in setting up that. So we're really pleased to have your collective views and experiences to learn from today. So I'm firstly just going to quickly share my slides with you, just to give a bit of a overview of what we mean by place-based giving, so we're all kind of on the same page. As we kind of haven't got the opportunity to hear from you, I'm going to try and start just by doing a short poll, which wherever you're listening from, it'd be great if you can respond to this so we can see kind of who's listening and what you know about place-based giving already. So I'm going to launch the poll now. So please tell us kind of how much you'd say you know about place-based giving already. Is this something you're expert in? Are you new to it? you do that now, right? Well, and also it'd be great to hear what term you kind of most associate with place-based giving. There are many different things that we'll have time to explore, but it'd be really helpful to get a sense of what most kind of means or connects you with this concept of place-based giving. It's great, lots of people filling that in, which is good. Okay, couple more seconds for that. Do your final answers if you've not already. Okay, I'm going to end that and share the results, which hopefully you can see. So reasonable knowledge of place-based giving. No one's saying they're an expert, and a couple of people who are new to it. So that's good, kind of mix of people. And what terms you most associate with place-based giving. So it's interesting to see most people very sort of strongly identifying that this is a way of funders working collaboratively together in a local place, involvement of the community-led grant making, local advocacy and fundraising. Brilliant. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing those. And that was slightly, I suppose, a slightly kind of trick question, because really place-based giving is all of those things, we would argue. It's kind of, I suppose, built on this concept that everybody has something to give. That might be time, it might be talent, so skills, local knowledge, connections, and resources. And really it's about place-based giving schemes come together to look at how they can best leverage all of those assets that a local community has, and think about the best way to collectively use that for the benefit of their local area. These are 5 kind of principles that we've come up with from the years that we've been working with place-based giving schemes in London, which really kind of get at the ethos and the values of why there are place-based giving schemes and what they're trying to achieve. You know, the second one, this shared understanding of local aspirations and needs, not driven by, you know, a certain set of donors or funders. So it's all about how we can better understand what communities want, and how we share and kind of utilise that understanding to benefit and find solutions that work. It's about listening and sharing power with local people. So a lot of place-based giving schemes are really embracing how to work in a more participatory way with the local community in terms of how decisions are made, how funding is allocated and distributed. The fourth is around collaboration. So interesting that came up very strongly in the polling. How can we collaborate with different partners to find better ways to improve the places we live in? And the fifth is this independence from any one stakeholder. So the idea that all partners have an equal voice, and place-based giving schemes really seek to build strong partnerships across all sectors, and look at kind of how they can collectively work together, often with, as we like to say, the kind of unusual suspects as well within a local area, to look at how to build stronger communities. The tagline I've put at the bottom is kind of one of the strongest things that came out of some kind of work we've done to evaluate the learning over the last 6 years. And really it's kind of not what you do, but how you do it. And that kind of collaboration, I'd really say, is a key part of that. So here we have it in a slightly more diagram form. And I think we often say the kind of real prize of place-based giving is that added value of how they work differently with the local community. I think a lot of people probably best know or engage possibly with place-based giving in terms of grant making, which is certainly a really key part of what they do. But it's also kind of the other ways of listening with the community, the in-kind support. So some of this might look like volunteering, brokering opportunities between local businesses and the voluntary sector, making connections, and thinking how else to make the most of the, you know, the rich resources and assets that we have within London. However, speaking of money, I did just want to share some of the kind of figures that we've got. So we've been working with our partners Rocket Science for the past number of years to help us evaluate the impact of place-based giving schemes across London. This was the data from last year from 10 schemes. So it's an underestimation really of the overall numbers that we have. But it does show the kind of income and grants that they've given out, the value of the in-kind support and volunteering. And we also know that this figure has hugely gone up within the last year. So we're just getting the data back from the last financial year, and in part because of COVID, which has kind of really accelerated a lot of the work that place-based giving schemes have done. We're seeing this kind of figure, I think it was almost 8 million within the last year. So huge growth and huge potential. We think within place-based giving. My last slide is just to share, I suppose, some of our overall reflections from London funders and from speaking to people involved in place-based giving over the last year. What we're seeing is far more focus and the shift and desire to be more sort of participant-led in terms of grant making, how funding programs are designed and how money is allocated. The desire, I think, to think how we can best capitalise on what has come from, you know, what's been an incredibly challenging year with COVID, but I think locally it's made people think very differently about their local communities and what they want to give and what they can give, whether that's money or time or many other things. And across the movement, there's, you know, some really exciting changes, I think, in terms of how we do that. I think the last year has also shown the value of having locally based giving schemes who understand the local area, the local context, and work very closely with the local community and have those connections, you know, to really understand where the gaps are, where the inequalities are, which have, you know, been widened in many places because of the pandemic, and what the solutions are to tackling that. It's certainly accelerated collaboration for many, lots of new partnerships, which is really exciting. And the trust, which is at the heart of that, I think is something that place-based giving schemes have really been able to build on. And I think the final reflection from us is, you know, London is a hugely diverse city, as we know. The boroughs are diverse, the communities are diverse, and across the network of place-based giving schemes, we're also seeing that play out, you know, in terms of their size, their scope, and their focus. And we believe, you know, that's the strength that we need to celebrate. It also means that the models and the approaches look very different borough to borough. And that's certainly something we're exploring more, to think how we can best support those schemes to be sustainable in the long term. But, you know, it's something that makes them different. And I think, you know, that diversity is something that we want to celebrate as well. So that's enough from me. I shall stop sharing. So I wondered if I could come to our panel in turn and ask you just to talk a bit more about who you are and your role in place-based giving. We seem to have lost Savraj. Oh no, she's back, that's good. Place-based giving, and kind of what made you be involved in the first place. Rachel, can I come to you first?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. I am Rachel Engel. I head up the Macquarie Group Foundation for the EMEA region. Macquarie, for those of you that don't know, global financial services business. We've got about 16,000 people worldwide, of which over 2,000 are in this region, of which around, I think we're on about 1,600 are based out of our London office, which is within the London Borough of Islington. Whilst we're sort of, you know, I'm looking out over the city of London, but actually our postcode is an Islington postcode. So the question about why place for us is really important. Our purpose as a corporate organisation is empowering our people to innovate and invest for a better future. We've always had an ethos of supporting the communities in which we live and work. We very much empower our staff to do that, and we feel it's sort of incumbent on us as a business to help facilitate those opportunities. And so when we kind of landed in Islington, I say landed, we were literally over the road in the City of London in another building 10 years ago, and then we moved over here. We'd very much been focusing on supporting the community in Hackney. It was local, it was easy to access. We knew that staff wanted to contribute time and money, as well as the business. And so when we landed in Islington, it was a bit of a no-brainer for us to come into Islington and support the community. However, when we got here, we found it quite hard to engage the community. We found it hard to find organisations to help broker the relationships that are needed for, I believe, large corporates like ourselves to have a true impact, a meaningful impact. And so, to cut a very long story short, we met Kristina and the team at Cripplegate at a point where they were just designing this idea for Islington Giving, and it felt like the right partnership for us to engage with them in order to help us elevate our impact in the community. We feel very strongly that actually the expertise lies within the community organisations about what the need is. It's not for us as a large corporate financial services firm to determine what we think the need is for Islington, but actually for the community to tell us where our funds will be best deployed and where our skills will be best utilised. And so partnering with Islington Giving gave us a real opportunity to do that, and we've had an extremely successful partnership with Islington Giving for, like I said, nearly 10 years. When COVID happened, that history, that trust that had been built up, the impact that we'd had with thousands of our staff getting out into the community and really having an impact on local organisations or with students through the mentoring program that we manage, meant that as COVID happened, it was very easy for us to know who to talk to, where to turn, where our support would be best needed. And seeing how Islington Giving was aligning with the London community response and the fund attached, it again was very easy for us using our COVID fund to understand where our funding would best be deployed effectively. So we moved from, or we continue to support Islington Giving, but we had a separate fund that we were able to donate to the LCRF. And that has been extremely positive, both for us as a corporate, but I believe as well for the fund as well, because we've been able to get into not just supporting organisations in Islington, but across London and many of those locations where our staff are living. I'll just pause on the kind of the why from a business perspective. Not only do we have this ethos of supporting the communities in which we live and work, but we also know that it is no longer just a nice to do good corporate investment in the communities, but actually it's essential. And it's essential both from a shareholder perspective, but also from the perspective of our staff, who very much are looking for adjacencies to their day-to-day role. They want to be working for a business that is having a positive social impact, and where we can widen participation, we always will. So there's a lot more there, a lot more to unpick, but doing this type of work collaboratively with other funders who have expertise, giving us a license to operate, and helping us elevate the funds that we have from our perspective is really why we have a very strong focus on place as one aspect of our grant making. I'll pause there. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you, Rachel. Kristina, can I come to you next? Why place-based giving for you?
Why? Well, Rachel said a lot of it, and thank you very much for inviting me. I've been involved in the giving movement since it started. I was director of quite a traditional funder, Cripplegate Foundation, been giving grants for 500 years in Islington. That was fine. But actually what was clear is that giving grants is not enough. to actually address the complexity of the issues facing communities in London, whether it's Islington, Hackney, Haringey. Giving grants is not enough. And that was really the start of Islington Giving, which I helped to set up in 2010, because that recognition that the issues facing our communities are not going to be resolved by one sector, by one organisation. It is about how we can do things collectively, because the issues are so huge. And giving schemes are actually what that's about. It is actually about, as you said, Helen, bringing together the unusual suspects. Why would a business like Macquarie, our local fish and chip shop, funders who've been there for 500 years, residents who know their streets up and down and back to front and have a very different view of the world than we do as funders, and the voluntary sector, what would they do if they came together to make a difference in their own backyard? And this isn't about small being beautiful. It's about the power of different people who've got knowledge and experience, bringing them together to effect change. And over the past 10 years, and particularly over the past year, we've seen how that change can happen. So whether it's businesses like Macquarie that have long-term relationships with their places based on shared values. This isn't, as Rachel said, jumping in and saying we want to do this, that, or the other. It's actually about our shared values. It's the phenomenal support that schemes have generated for their communities during the pandemic. And there's all sorts of examples of that, which we know about, whether that's supporting individuals or actually raising issues that have been hidden for a long time in terms of inequalities. And crucially, using our independence, because we're not beholden to any one organisation or sector, to be that voice for people who are seldom seen and frankly never heard. They're never heard. We talk about it a lot, but we don't really hear people. And watching the growing development and strength and difference, which you talked about, Helen, and you have, Rachel, it's different in every borough. It's using our strengths and using our knowledge. That's what keeps me involved. And that's why place-based giving is so important now. We've seen over the last year that connections have never been as important as they are now. We've all craved for them, and whether they've become virtual. We know, and for the first time, we're all inhabiting the areas where we live more than where we used to work. And place-based giving is absolutely essential, I think, now, and really is the zeitgeist, because we talked about working collaboratively for a long time, and the last year has made us do it.
Thank you, Kristina. And Savraj, I know you've had a few internet, hopefully you're all right now.
I'm here, I should be good now. Yeah, I'm on my hotspot. So yeah, thank you for having me, first of all. So I'm Savraj, and I'm Executive Director at United in Hammersmith and Fulham in West London. My background is actually international development, and the idea behind that was that we always plan to prevent the worst possible scenario. And I think that's the case here with place-based giving as well. So it kind of happened the other way around in the past year, but I think, yes, you know, money now is important, but I think a joined up approach to making things better is really the best way for the future. So as Kristina said, doing things collectively is key. And that's the best thing about place-based giving. And I was born in Hammersmith, so I've kind of come full circle to run United. And when I joined London Funders, or the term place-based giving was quite new to me, but now I'm a full convert, so I want to see it everywhere I go. And why it's important, I mean, it's all been said really, but building strong communities and showing that anyone, literally anyone, can be a part of this is possible. And I think some people might not believe that anyone can be a part of a strong community, but anyone really has something to give. And one example is, I was just having a chat with a community leader about a year ago about just at what she's been doing. And she's like, oh, I just came back from seeing kids, you're not using their, they were using their mum's smartphone, 3 kids using their mum's smartphone during lockdown. So they just had to like prioritize whose schooling was more important. And as a result of that, like 15 months later, we've got a council partnership with head teachers to get 1,500 kids devices. They've identified those most in need. The council's partnering with me at United as a charity and a social enterprise. That we've just got like about 5 different elements of the community together. Businesses are jumping in. Tech volunteers are helping out by giving time. And I might not have said that the most clear way possible. I can explain more to anyone who wants to know, but it just shows that just having a conversation and sharing your insights or your experience about what you've seen that day could really snowball into this amazing response. So yeah, I'm just thrilled to see that place-based giving is growing, whether it's here or anywhere else in London, and it makes more and more sense every day. Yeah, so I'm lucky to be leading it here in West London.
Thank you, Savraj. And yeah, we should say, so there's about, I think, 15 or so active schemes in boroughs across London, but this is, not a London-only phenomenon of place-based giving. There are some really excellent place-based giving schemes across, the country and in other places as well. There was a big kind of programme a couple of years ago supported by the DCMS, which put some initial investment into some place-based giving schemes, including one of our the members of our network in Barking and Dagenham, but also places like Manchester, in Bristol, and certainly we're really trying to look at how we can learn from them as well and what they found has worked in their areas, and continue to kind of share that learning too. I follow up some of the things that you've talked about. You've all talked about collaboration and partnerships being really key to place-based giving. Do you think that's changed, particularly in light of COVID? Has the sort of shape of those partnerships changed? Is there different? Are you seeing different partners coming on board or kind of showing a particular interest in place-based giving? Savraj, I don't know if that's something I could come to you first on.
Yeah, I mean, just from personal experience, I think people are more open to having the conversations about how they can help in their local area. So I'm thinking of businesses in particular, or just generally residents. There's definitely more of an interest and openness about hearing what's going on and how and what the possible solutions are and how they can help. So where before I found I was knocking on doors for about a year until I got a conversation going. Now it's like, people want to know who we are and what we're doing, and they value this kind of element of the community that we're offering support with.
Yeah. And Kristina, I know you've obviously been involved in place-based giving for a number of years. Have you seen, have there sort of been particular shifts that you've noticed in terms of the way that collaborations kind of are happening, or who those unusual suspects, you mentioned the fish and chip shop, to, big business, to local high schools, how have you seen that change, do you think?
Well, I think when we started, people thought, this is another way of giving grants locally. That's what people saw it as. And let's be clear, it's not that. There are plenty of experienced organisations doing just that. So it was really being very clear about getting the message out. As Savraj has said, these are the issues in our area. Did you know that you're living in a place with the second highest level of child poverty in the country? Did you know that the levels of mental ill health, we have the highest levels of depression in the whole of London? Did you know that there's also amazing opportunities for your children 5 minutes from where you live? And the answer was no. People did not know what was happening in their own backyard. And I think that's what's actually changed, and that's what place-based giving has been able to bring. There's the evidence, there's the deep knowledge, and actually something that you're not paid for, passion. I mean, all the place-based giving schemes have a real passion. I mean, Savraj was born in the place she's working. There are a lot of people who are doing that. It matters to them in a way that goes beyond a job. And therefore, getting the connections with business. Oh, sorry, it just went off, sorry. That actually have as much stake in a place as a voluntary organisation. But in the past, we've never seen that. We've always seen them as people to donate rather than actually the skills and the social capital they're bringing. So I think over the years and in different places, we've been able to bring in, using those principles, being really clear, these are our principles. If you want to donate to donkeys, that's great, but probably a place-based giving scheme is not for you. But if you want to work with others, and these are the issues in the area that affect you, come and do it. So it's both evidence-based, passion-based, and actually why it will make a difference to you. And I think the skill of the movement has actually been able to do that, with saying quite different things in Kingston, Harrow, Barking and Haringey, but the underlying message has been the same.
I just, Helen, if you don't mind, I'll just add just one of those trends I've certainly seen. You asked Savraj about sort of COVID and you know, if anything sort of changed. I think for our staff, where 18%, roughly 18% of our staff prior to COVID actually lived in the London Borough of Islington, so we knew there was sort of capacity and definitely an interest for people that lived in the borough. We obviously work in the borough. What we've seen, I think, since COVID is this hyper-local mindset. So where people were interested in giving back, having a social impact, they would look to the company to help guide and steer them in some way, shape or form. Now that they've been at home for so long, now that they've suddenly realized that there is a whole community, particularly for people who don't have children, that aren't necessarily affiliated religiously, locally, you know, suddenly your local space is, you know, it might be the gym, but really you're getting on the tube and you're coming to work. And I think, you know, particularly for our younger population, suddenly local hyper place became really, really important to them. And so I think that with the London's giving, you know, movement, with the giving movement across London, being able to point people to their local giving, not just Islington, I think for us it has been a real shift change. We previously had a board member who came to me and actually said, look, you know, I get Islington, but actually I live in Hammersmith. Who do we know? How can I support? And we put them in touch with Hammersmith Unites, and he was on the board for a while. I know he's recently moved to Bath, and so is presumably coming off the board, given it's a focus on place. But you see that kind of shift in mindset where people really want to be helping, supporting, engaging, collaborating where they live, and that changed with COVID. Our high streets locally are flourishing a lot more outside of the sort of inner city boroughs, for sure. We're certainly feeling that personally in Barnet, for example. So yeah, share that.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. And I guess building on that point, because I think, you know, the theme of the GLA's festival is all around what makes a strong community. How can we build communities, and what does a strong community mean to different people living in that community? I think you've raised a really key point, which is, as you've said, it's shifted our perception of place and what that means. It's, you know, improved our connection with place in many cases. It has also, you know, for others, it's kind of been a more alienating kind of period of time. And I think certainly from doing the evaluation, we've seen, you know, locally, that has, you know, led to, in some cases, some real opportunities to think differently about how to engage with local business. And actually some of the schemes are, you know, now playing that role of supporting local businesses themselves, kind of particularly micro businesses who struggled through the pandemic, and looking at which other partners they can now engage with, who are now kind of looking at their local community a bit differently. I mean, has that been the case in Hammersmith and Fulham? Sort of have you noticed anything, particularly from, say, residents, kind of local residents, on how they're perceiving their local area and what that might mean for their engagement in place-based giving?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of measurable, how we can see measurably, people are giving more in terms of cash. People are signing up to news and just inquiring about things in the neighbourhood. People are literally every day in the pandemic, how can I help? How can I roll my sleeves up, even though I'm working full time still, or even if I'm furloughed? Or so people are just super aware now of what their place might be in their community. And so, yeah, it's really nice to see that in terms of numbers, real numbers, but also I think the sense of belonging has grown a lot, and we really want to just continue that, because I think that, when you're in London and we've got a very high kind of percentage of a transient community, there might not be that sense of belonging. So I think it's super important that we push, and then we just kind of piggyback off of all of this and continue that feeling, because that, I think, has the ripple effects of making it a better place for everyone as well.
Yeah. Kristina.
And I think people have heard about place-based giving for the first time. As Savraj said, people wanted to do something. So in Haringey, for instance, people found Haringey Giving and are now donating, rather than Haringey Giving going out to find people. People are looking and have found them, and they have learnt about their areas in a way that, just a year ago they would not know. And that is actually being converted into people who want to support longer term. But I think also in terms of our businesses, it's actually valuing, the high street particularly, valuing their contribution to social capital, rather than just talking about what can they give, what can they donate, because they're the places that have been accessible. They have been social, they're highly social, they're quite diverse, they're places where people feel safe, and they're as much part of a place and our community as the voluntary sector in lots of places. So I think it's actually made us think differently within the movement as well, about what place is and who our supporters and allies are.
We've got a question coming through. So just a reminder, if you're listening in, do put any questions in the Q&A function or in the chat, and I'll keep an eye on that too. One very quick question that's come through the chat is if there's an up-to-date list of place-based giving schemes in London. Yes, there is. There's one on our website. I'll make sure I'll put the link in the chat. In terms of the rest of the UK, I know that was in your question too. I'm not sure if there is an up-to-date list as such. There is some information as a sort of legacy of the DCMS place-based programme, but not one, as far as I'm aware, that kind of neatly draws all that together. But that's certainly something I'll take away and see if we can add links to the non-London ones from the London's Giving website as well. So the question from Mark was, is place-based giving more suited to certain places? Is it more common in inner London than outer London? So anybody want to take that one? Kristina?
Well, when we started giving, we were told, well, Islington, would happen there, wouldn't it? It can't happen anywhere else. It wouldn't happen in a place like Barking and Dagenham, somebody in Barking and Dagenham said to me. And in fact, we have a very successful scheme in Barking and Dagenham, and we have them in Kingston, we have them in Merton, we have them in Harrow. And the key thing, which I think you said, Helen, and actually we've all said, is they adapt to their places, and we all have different assets. And the giving movement is about using your assets, and they are your people, your places, your connections, and your networks. So this isn't just about, as we often say, one size fits all. It's very different. And some of our most successful schemes are what you would call outer London. So no, it is not an inner London issue at all. And especially, I think, through the pandemic, that has changed again, where we think we can do things, and the traditional ways of doing things have been really disrupted.
Rachel,
yeah, I just wanted to share an example. What I think is quite unique, certainly for us, and I can only obviously talk about our experience, but certainly for us, is that we're able to test ideas with Islington Giving, and so this is aligned to that question about inner and outer London boroughs. What we found is what we're testing with Islington Giving around, we're doing a young people's jobs programme, where we are basically funding a project for some young people to go on to do, you know, the equivalent hours of sort of a Saturday job, but they'll be able to do it with whenever, whatever, and being supported into doing that and paid with local small businesses. So that sort of test and how we're going to, I suppose, play with that model, see what's going to work, you know, which community partners we want to work with, is the sort of thing that I think could be lifted and shifted into other boroughs, particularly the outer boroughs that have less condensed focus of larger corporates like ourselves, but have a much greater amount of small businesses that might not be able to do the traditional sort of philanthropy from a business perspective, but actually be able to use their assets or their organisations in their entirety to help as part of the place-based giving movement. So I use that as just an example of, I think it totally depends on the borough, the makeup of it. You know, Barnet, where I'm based, is completely different to Islington. You know, size, scale, number of corporates, etc., a number of, you know, historic grant makers, etc. But I think there's some examples of where we can test things that could be taken elsewhere to benefit the broader community. And I do think the SME community is the sweet spot. We all have high streets, we all have villages within our boroughs, and so I think that's the kind of the niche bit for me.
Brilliant, thanks Rachel. There's a couple more questions, so I shall start to field those if that's all right. We've got one about the DCMS programme, which I mentioned, and what role is the government playing in place-based giving, if any? Good question. I think, well, I'll attempt to answer that one and see if anyone wants to jump in. I think at the moment there was, you know, a lot of interest generated by that DCMS programme, and I think, you know, largely a lot of those schemes were really successful, you know, Barking and Dagenham being one of them, which is now sort of thriving. So I think we've, you know, certainly tried to sort of go back and engage a bit to see where that programme's kind of going up to. I think in reality, I think it's all slightly paused a bit with kind of everything that's gone on in the last year. But there has been, you know, discussion with, you know, various other kind of policies and papers that have come out since that programme, which all are pointing back to place and this value of place. And I think it's fair to say the concept of place is never, you know, it's talked about, you know, more than ever, and thinking about particularly how communities can be more involved in those places, looking at the assets and certainly longer term programmes of support that might enable more place-based giving schemes, you know, to be set up and to be sustainable, because I think that's, you know, one of the challenges that the DCMS programme was a, you know, a time limited programme. Yeah, my answer is, in terms of what their specific thinking is at the moment, is I don't know. We'll continue to try and kind of engage with that, because I think, you know, with all the agendas around kind of levelling up and other things, you know, there's a lot of opportunities, I think, to really try and you know, advocate for the role that place-based giving can play in part of that. Don't know if anyone else wants to come in on that. Otherwise, I shall move to the next questions. I'll read the next two out together, and you can come in on whichever you'd like, panel. So we've got one about, are there challenges that come with the collaborative approach of place-based giving? And if so, any advice or thoughts on how to deal with those challenges? And another one from Garrett, which is, what are, if any, perceived barriers that residents have shared with you that prevent them from engaging with the movement? So 2 good questions. I wonder, I don't know if anyone wants to come in, but I wonder, Savraj, particularly that second one about kind of the barriers for local residents to engage with the movement, either I suppose is, you know, giving time or money, but also in some of the decision making in particular, because I think that's something that a lot of giving schemes have really tried to embrace, is how to engage local residents who have that experience of the issues which, you know, place-based giving schemes are trying to find solutions for. You know, they've got the insights, they've got the knowledge, how can they best contribute and share in that decision making? Have you got any thoughts?
I was going to answer the other one, but okay.
Okay, do that
yeah.
too.
Okay, so yeah, so I think, yeah, I mean, you've just kind of said it really. So one of the issues, not just residents, but groups like hyperlocal community groups sometimes struggle to just keep up with what they need to do. And, you know, they still see us as this kind of person with power, giving out money or making connections or giving opportunities. And I think just kind of closing that gap. So, you know, getting them to join in on the conversation before we have funding available, or setting up, we've just set up, I'm super excited, we've just set up our community grants panel. So they are representative panel, which I should say before, our panels were not representative at all. So that was a really big mission for me to get going. And thanks to Camden and Camden's advice, we've been able to set that up. So that's like the first step, but I think it's the first step on a long road to getting people to feel like they really do have an equal say. There is still that issue of power play, and yeah, we could just keep working on that by some of it is obviously just putting in the time to open up, just be an open door and say, look, we're here to listen and we're here to collaborate and we're here to take on your, you know, we're not just here to chat to you and then go away and carry on doing the same thing. So just building that culture within the organization, I think, is the first step, even before anything else.
Brilliant, thank you. And I'm just going to add here, and we can add it in the chat, is that you mentioned Camden Giving. They've done loads of work around particularly participatory grant making, and have done an excellent toolkit around how to kind of approach participatory grant making, which is on the website. So do have a look at that. And they've got a fantastic team of advisors from the community who are now offering support to other place-based giving schemes on how they might adopt some of that learning as well. Challenges with collaboration. Anybody want to come in on that one? Kristina? I
would say that's the work. I mean, that is what place-based giving is about. It is about collaboration. And that's what you do all the time, constantly. So you could say it's a challenge, or you could say that defines place-based giving scheme. And everybody comes to it differently. People have different priorities. They have different cultures. They have different languages. They have different priorities. People have different amounts of time. So you could say that's a challenge, or you could say, how amazing, we've got all these different ways of seeing the world, which frankly, I didn't know, I hadn't thought about. And what is it that we can put together? And I would say that is the work, and it's hard, and it's never finished, because actually as you do it, you find new opportunities and things that are more difficult, and you think, no, that isn't going to work for us. But frankly, it is about changing how people work together. That's what place-based giving schemes are about. It's about systems change, and none of us find it easy. none of us find it easy to think or be in a different setting, in a different culture, with things that you've never heard of and never come across before. But actually, the great prize is the difference, and it is not the sort of thing that you can do on your own. And just that as Savraj said, well, I met some people and I talked to them, and then we did a bit of this. Rachel saying, oh yeah, and then we're just testing a little bit of this. They make it sound very simple, very easy. But actually, that collaboration in practice and knowing how and when to work with people is difficult. But you've got the success in front of you. You've got these two women. They've got the giving movement. But I wouldn't see it as a barrier, and I wouldn't see it as a challenge. I would just say that is the movement. I don't know what you two would think, or you three.
Rachel, you've obviously collaborated for a long time with Givings.
Yeah, I think sort of the practical answer I would give to that is, it does come down to first, it comes down to trust. So Kristina and I, when we first met, didn't know each other. She was working for an organisation that was over 500 years old and only focused on a very small part of the world. At the time, Macquarie was less than 50 years old as a bank, which is very young in banking world. And we have a global footprint. So, you have to build trust in a relationship organisationally, and that comes through really good communications, being really open and transparent, as Kristina said, about what your objectives are, and being almost quite selfish about just being very open. Why am I here? Why does Macquarie want to be in and part of the community in Islington? What is our purpose, and how does that align back to our business? And I think we were quite upfront with Islington Giving when we started. They wanted us just to give an open fund and let them get on with making the grants. We said, well, that's not how we operate. We want our staff to be involved. So we worked on coming to a sort of mutual position, which actually led to the establishment of the big alliance, which is the sort of infrastructure part of how we engage locally. So I think good comms, good relationship building, taking your time, having a structure. So actually very early on, Islington Giving established a board, an advisory board, regular meetings, individual meetings were happening, so that everybody kind of built those relationships. I also think there is an element of leadership that's required. I think that if you look at the really successful Givings, there is always an anchor organisation or individual actually that is sort of come up to the fore. You're not, as much as we want to be collaborative and equal, and that's not how the world works. You do need something organisationally or individually to take a leadership point and help drive activity. And I think the final point to all of that is data, and actually having the numbers, having the evidence, being able to prove the purpose and the point as to what the need is in the borough, and actually everything else will fall alongside if you've got that evidence. So are those challenges? Yes. Are they easily surmounted? Yes. I think with all of those little, I suppose, operational tips that we've learned along the way, that's worked really well for us.
Brilliant, thank you. Some good positives here. As you've all said, kind of collaboration is so key, and it's not always easy, and that is part of the process, isn't it? And I think there's huge value that comes from that as well, whatever the outcome. We've got about 5 minutes left, and before I come to you with any kind of final thoughts, I'm just going to launch a final poll, hopefully, if I get this right, which all of our attendees can respond to. So this question is, where is the greatest, or where you see the greatest potential for place-based giving to help build stronger communities in the future? So what could they do more? Where do you see their kind of value in the future? And if it's not something that's listed there, tell us what you think it is in the chat. We can't unfortunately work out the tech to do free text answers, so tell us in the chat. can pick as many as you like.
Panelists aren't allowed to poll. I mean,
Oh, aren't you?
Yeah.
Oh no, I apologise. We must have got the setting on.
that's all right.
Sorry, you can tell us. I'll come to you. So I'll just give people a few more seconds. And while you do that, I'm just going to put in the chat a link to the London's Giving website, which has got lots of resources, lots of information. And also thanks to Daniel at CAF as well, who's also put a couple of links to reports about the DCMS programme and the learning that they've collated from the place-based giving schemes there. Yeah, which is definitely a good read. Okay, I'm going to end the polling and share those results. So we have giving local people more control over funding decisions, which is good to see. Yeah, stronger engagement. Otherwise, lots of support for other things that we can do more of going forward. And I should say, yeah, Cameron was unable to join in the end from Camden Giving, but he's one of the community panelists who has been involved in sharing you know, that process and taking part in their participatory grant making. Do check out Camden Giving's website if you're interested. They've got, as I said, an excellent resource and a team of local people who've been involved in that process. They also offer advice to place-based giving schemes. So do look them up if you want to find out more about what they're doing. So final 2 minutes, any final thought from our panel on where next for place-based giving? How can they continue to build strong communities in London? Savraj. Can we go?
Yeah, I mean, I think with the poll, it's all of the above. So they all kind of interlinked. Hopefully you can hear me. It says my internet is unstable again. But yeah, they're all interlinked. So we really need to just carry on building that culture, collaborating more, using our strengths where they are best placed. That's the biggest one. So, you know, we can't be everything for everyone, and then we all have our pluses to bring. And then being smarter with resource distribution, being data driven. That's my next challenge here. I think it's just going to continue to be a learning curve, but it's the only way to ensure that we do the best for our boroughs in the longer term. And yes, cross-borough sharing. I love that bit as well. And that's where I've picked up a lot of my knowledge.
Brilliant. Thank you. Rachel, any final thoughts from you?
Just, I think, a bit more insights into the other borough and giving movements as they are. As I said, I think our staff are now very focused on being hyperlocal, as well as, you know, anchored in Islington. But I think now that there's real capacity, dare I say, and also need. I think there's much more impetus for us as a business to now start thinking about what are the other giving movements and how can those staff that are interested really have an impact on their local doorstep to where they're living, if they're going to be working more often at home, as we move to what, you know, we're moving to a hybrid model. So and I don't think that will change for quite some time anyway. So I think that for me is what is sort of keeping me thinking about what we need to do, particularly with London's Giving more broadly.
Brilliant, thank you. And Kristina?
I've got 3 things I think we should be doing. One, using the growing evidence base of what works, who we're reaching, who we're not reaching, and we've got a lot of that evidence now. Secondly, there's an opportunity to work on issues, as you both said, that go beyond borough boundaries, where we all can respond differently, but we can have a theme between all the givings. So whether that's the digital exclusion that Savraj has talked about, young people into work that Rachel's talked about, but also that need to connect with others that we picked up and the givings are really good at, that cuts across age and gender and is actually intersectional. We can really do that now. And thirdly, this is a real challenge for us, but actually working with some of the really large key players, such as councils and health, really important now, to develop not just a shared agenda, but some shared practice, because we know what works on a hyper-local level. So ambitious, but we can do it.
Well, that seems excellent, an excellent note to close up this session on. So I just wanted to firstly say thank you, a big thank you to the three of you for contributing and sharing so much with us over the last hour. To everyone who's been listening, thank you for joining us, and I hope you can follow up on some of the links that we've put in the chat. Get in touch with us at London Funders. Sign up to our London's Giving newsletter, which goes out sharing kind of updates and news and practice from across place-based giving schemes. And yeah, I shall just end by saying thank you very much to everybody, and enjoy other sessions if you're tuning in at the Festival of Ideas. All right, thanks very much, everybody.
Thanks, Helen. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.